Hi everybody, Professor Snart checking in. As we get a little bit further into our Intro to Lit course, moves quickly like I'd mentioned before in my earlier video, so we're going to take a quick look at our due dates. Alright, so I'm recording this on Monday the 24th, so we're just finishing up Unit 3 here, and we're moving into Unit 4, and then basically like the capstone set of units for our short fiction part of our class. And I'm going to walk us through those, even though they're kind of getting a little bit out in front of us, because they're going to involve us working collaboratively or in very small groups, which is something that often doesn't happen in the online setting. But I'm going to try to, well, try to do it, obviously. But I'm going to try to scaffold it and introduce it early, so you have the chance to just basically connect with your partner or with your group members. Which can be kind of like the main challenge, because we're not actually all in class together ever. We have to figure out ways to connect with each other and to communicate in ways that make sense for that particular group. So I'll walk us through that in just a second here. All right, so just a quick look into Unit 3, which had us doing that little Padlet assignment, which, as we look at it, has a few people that have posted, right, where they've taken pictures of things that kind of remind them of things that are going on, like elements of setting or mood that are happening in some of the stories that we've looked at. Again, it's about Monday at midday, so I'd really like to be seeing, some more engagement here. There's a few folks, but not many, who've really got this done in what I would call a timely manner. And then, of course, there's the discussion board that you can hopefully see, towards the bottom of my screen capture. So we're dividing our time a little bit between a couple of different things for Unit 3. And then Unit 4, we're going to look at a short story called The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. But we're going to do this through the lens, or as a sort of comparative project, for how it was originally published. Now, you can sort of do this with just about any story, because they're not originally published or collected. They're collected in our textbook, but not originally published there. And sometimes it's interesting to compare what they looked like in their original versus the textbook. Sometimes there's really not a lot of difference, especially for more contemporary things. But the Yellow Wallpaper is turn of the 20th century, so there are actually some really interesting differences, and that's what we're going to spend our time doing. So, of course, we care about what's going on in the story, kind of like thematically, and who the characters are, and the bigger ideas. But we're also interested in a sort of different take on the story, comparing a couple of different versions, and then thinking about how those differences maybe point to or alert us to or invite us to consider some of the other themes that are going on in the story. So the usual reading assignment, the quiz, kind of getting you a little bit primed to think about the story, and then its original place of publication you can find through this direct link here. If for whatever it doesn't work, you can find this larger database that actually collects, digitizes a whole bunch of this kind of thing, providing digital versions of basically like the original way that these stories were presented or published. And in this case, it was published in 1892 in the New England magazine. So an interesting bit of trivia, but maybe not super important. But what you'll notice then, and what this kind of activity invites you to do, is to look for some other key differences. And I'm sort of pointing to some pretty obviously here, but you might notice some other ones. And then we also want to think about not just the story itself, but its larger context. So that's where its publication in this kind of magazine is important. Maybe it would be even interesting to find out if this magazine generally circulated amongst the wealthy white women or working class men or whatever. Like, what's the readership, in other words, and does that maybe affect the way that the story was understood in its original publication because it's showing up in this magazine? This little bit here you'll find is this poem about, yes, a bucket, that shows up in the original magazine publication just after the story. So even that is sort of interesting to think about. Like, you read this sort of heavy, deep, short story, and then a poem about a bucket. Does that sort of color or affect how we understand the story and its seriousness or what it's going for? Maybe yes, maybe no, but it's an important question, I think, to ask. Okay, so the discussion board that's just down at the bottom of my screen capture here is really just asking you to reflect on some of the interesting differences that you notice in this original publication by looking through the actual link here versus how it's presented in our textbook or in a textbook. And not just to list the differences, you know, which is sort of like factual stuff, but then to just speculate about why those are interesting, or what they draw our attention to, or what they reveal, or how they might shape our understanding of the story in one version versus another. So it's not just a question of trivia, it's like what sense can we make of those factual differences that we can find. Replying to at least 2 other posts, and you're going to notice that you have to do your own post here before you can read and reply to any others. So if you go in there and it doesn't look like anybody has contributed, that's not actually the case. That's the way it's set up. Okay, so kind of certainly an interesting and important short story that we read, and hopefully an interesting way of getting into some of the themes and ideas that are going on in that short story. All right, so quickly back to our due dates here, because I'm going to walk us a little further ahead than I normally would. Kind of thinking towards units 5 and 6, and I would really encourage you maybe to do some of this early framing work or scaffolding work now, that is getting in touch with your partner, just so that technical difficulty is out of the way. And it might not be a difficulty at all, but in terms of working collaboratively in the online setting, sometimes the toughest part, honestly, is just getting like connected initially with your partner and agreeing on a mode of communication that you can both kind of commit to. Okay, so let's take a look then at Unit 5. You'll see that Units 5 and 6 go together. They both form this group project. We started in 5 and then we finish it up in 6. 5, most of that planning, brainstorming work. 6, the actual execution of the plan. All right. So we're going to do something that's collaborative, so you're working with other people, and multimodal. In other words, it's not just text. We want to think about like image, video, audio, all of the other really great tools that we have to communicate with one another these days. So the group project explanation here, I'm not going to walk us too far through in terms of the details. It's sort of like think of it as a presentation, even though you don't really need to give the presentation. That's one thing that we haven't quite worked out in the online format. You and your partner are going to want to work in an environment like maybe a Google Slide. I choose Google just because it's really easy to collaborate on one document. You're not doing something, emailing it to the other person, they do something, email it back. You can both kind of work equally there. You could work on building a website. It sounds intimidating if it's something you've never done before, but is actually really easy to do, and again, really facilitates true collaborative work, like you can both be working on it at the same time. You're not emailing files back and forth. So this is some of that initial stuff that, especially if it's totally new to you, you can just sort of like get your feet wet a little bit. The assignment itself is basically comparative. Again, I'm not going to walk in too much detail through this part of it, since you can read it. It's hopefully fairly straightforward in terms of what the objectives are. And of course, projects are due not by the end of this unit, Unit 5, but Unit 6. So you have basically a planning unit where you can connect with your partner, begin to think through some of the, like, what platform are we going to use here? What stories do we want to choose for the comparison? Just all of that brainstorming stuff. And then Unit 6 will be where you have time to actually put it together. Truthfully, you can probably do a lot of the building part in Unit 5, so it's not like you have to separate them. But honestly, I want to give us like as much time to get just connected with our partner and make some upfront decisions about a path forward for each group. So it's not like you have to figure that out and then do it all in the space of one unit. Okay. So you'll notice that there's a groups list here, and since our class is fairly manageable size, it's mostly just partners. We had an odd number, so there's one group with 3 people. There is a wiki set up here that's just a planning space. It's not something that you'd necessarily need to use as part of your official project. It's just a place to connect. And I'll click us into that in a second. So what you want to do for this, so the assignment, I guess, for this particular unit, not for the project itself, but just for this unit, is to go into the wiki and begin some of that planning work. And remember, I'm talking about Unit 5 here, which is actually one removed from where we are. So we're really, really trying to get out in front of this. So if I click into this, and it'll look pretty much the same for me as it will for you, you'll notice that some of the assignment basics here in terms of the collaborative part are repeated from the Unit 5 itself. So what we want to do is, right, agree on a means of communication, maybe brainstorm some ideas, choose or investigate some possible platforms, whether it's a slideshow or if we want to do a website, whatever your group decides on, and then maybe clarify some expectations and timeline. So I really want to highlight here, I'm asking you to do group work, but I'm not just throwing you into it, or I sort of am, but I'm also giving you some strategies to make it effective, not just, well, you guys figure it out, let me know how it goes. We don't want to put anyone in that situation. So all you want to do then is obviously figure out what group you're with, and then you'll be able to sort of connect, at least initially, with your group members, or just member, by going into your page. So if I happen to be part of, let's say, the Tyler and Courtney group, I can just click into their page, which I've created. I've put the bullet points here just to remind us. So if I'm one of the group members, my job now is just to go in by doing the edit wiki content and just adding some stuff. So we might want to do some initial talk about communication. If you don't want to provide like a text, right, your phone number or whatever here, you can email each other using the COD student email thing. Obviously anything we post here in Blackboard is secure and contained, so you don't have to feel like this is going to leak out to the web at large somehow. And so I might post some thoughts. My partner is going to come in and post some responses, thoughts, but it's really just a way to get us connected early on. And then once we have that means of communication, we can move forward effectively and do some basic brainstorming. And then of course, actually as Unit 5 and then Unit 6 continues, work on the project itself. So again, brainstorming and then the actual project work. We're kind of folding together across Units 5 and 6. But like I said, to make group work possible, really in any format, but especially online, it's really, really important that we get in contact with each other early rather than later. So just like what I was seeing with Unit 3, it seems like a lot of people are waiting till kind of the last minute to jump in and sort of do everything, and that's not super effective. Especially for something like this, you don't want to wait till the end of the due date to finally get in here and then realize that you're sort of put yourself behind the 8 ball and you kind of screwed your partner as well, which is not cool. You really want to get in there before that due date, like right after this due date, Unit 4, that Friday, you kind of want to get on it just to make sure that you can connect with your partner. Notice that we do have a link to, obviously, the student email system here, but you can send email through our course, basically. It defaults to the student email. You can't send it to a personal email. That you'd have to work out with your partner. But again, Unit 5 is set up to at least get people connected initially and then change the way that they want to communicate or whatever the case might be. So I'm trying to like framework it and really provide enough time, provide some steps for effective collaboration here so you don't feel like you're trying to do the project and figure out just how to like get in touch with your partner, right? So I think it can be really successful, but obviously we need to attend to the details. I do reserve the right then to, if I see that a group member hasn't checked in and is not pulling their weight, I'm just going to pull them from the group. That person and I will have to work out something else. So we're looking at the groups as I have them configured right now, and I hope they don't change, but if things aren't working, then I certainly will make changes. So I want everyone to, truthfully, to sort of like enjoy the opportunity to work collaboratively in an online class, which, like I've said before, is not the norm. We do discussion boards, but that's interactive. It's not super collaborative though, and it's not, you don't feel like you've really produced a group project, even if you've participated in an interesting discussion with your peers. Okay, so that sort of carries us pretty far into our next units. I'll obviously check in sooner rather than later, especially as we get past Unit 4, and then I'm going to be encouraging people to get on Unit 5 to connect with your partner and just make sure everything is sort of in place for moving that capstone project forward as we finish up Units 5 and 6, which is kind of the end of the short fiction part of our Intro to Lit class.